What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, June 19th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Split slate today, 6 games starting at 1:05 Eastern, 5 games starting tonight at 6:40. Going to talk through both of those slates. Going to go through the early slate first and then follow it up with tonight's slate. I will throw the timestamps in the description after I'm done this show if you are watching it back later. But going to dive into both of them. Going golfing this afternoon, so not going to be around to do a show later. Figured I would just hit on them both now. No real weather concerns right now. Looks like there is some rain around for game one of the Pirates and Tigers, but seems like it should be okay from a DFS standpoint. Potentially a delay later in the game, I think. Also potentially a delay to start. But for now, at least treating it like I normally would. So that's nice not having to deal with too much weather today. Going to go through using the Run the Sims projections as always. If you are looking to use these, link is in the description below. 2 subscription options there. $100 a month gets you the full projections package, downloadable, fully detailed, everything coming straight out of our in-house play-by-play Sims. So you can have all the data you need to make your own decisions, do whatever you want with it. If that doesn't make sense for you, we do have the $10 a month MLB Draft Caddy as well. That overlays the DraftKings projection directly onto your lineups page. Very good for hand building lineups, late swapping by hand, stuff like that. Link is in the description below. Also, our PGA Sims are live now as well. Obviously, main slate started today, so not doing you a lot of good right now, but you should be aware that they are live. Use promo code Davis, get 10% off our PGA Sims. Use promo code UTAMLB, get 10% off the MLB projections. So do keep that in mind for PGA next week. We do have the PGA Sims up and running. We are still adding some stuff, improving all of that. You can talk about that in our Discord as well. Speaking of which, the Discord link is in the description also. Free Discord, hop in there whether you're subscribed or not. Trying to build that up. Good place to talk sports, good place to ask questions about projections and all of that. So check that out as well. Link is also below. Now getting into it, starting with the Angels taking on the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. The Yankees did score 2 runs yesterday, so their offense was infinitely better than it had been in their last few games. Today, Tyler Anderson going for the Angels. Carlos Rodon pitching for the Yankees. Rodon getting about 29% ownership on DraftKings. Anderson getting 2 to 3%. Obviously looking to prioritize Rodon more so than Anderson given the matchups. Same thing I said about Yarbrough yesterday. Obviously Rodon's a better pitcher. Do keep in mind this matchup is not as good for left-handed pitchers as it is for right-handed pitchers. The Angels lineup is predominantly right-handed. They will pretty much all have the platoon advantage here against Rodon. That being said, still a very good option. 40% chance of being optimal at $10,700. Very good strikeout pitcher. Also, of course, only a 6-game slate, so lower opportunity cost. Only a 135 expected ISO and 278 expected WOBA against right-handed hitters this year. 29.6% strikeout percentage. You would certainly prefer it if the Angels had more lefties, but Rodon is capable of getting righties out. And the bottom of this lineup is frankly dog shit. Scott Kingery, Kevin Newman, Moore at the bottom of the order. Not the best bats down there. Travis d'Arnaud is not bad. He is a lower strikeout rate guy than Logan O'Hoppe as well. So that's a little bit of a downgrade from a strikeout standpoint, at least, but no O'Hoppe in the lineup here either. So not the Angels A lineup against Rodon. Sets up pretty nicely for him. Like I said, 40% chance of being optimal, 8 to 9% chance of being optimal for Anderson at 2 to 3% owned. Large field tournaments, if he lands in a lineup here or there at 6,300, fine. He is really cheap. It's not impossible to have a good game against the Yankees, as Kyle Hendricks showed you the other day, but certainly not any level of priority. The Yankees are running a pretty balanced lineup out there against him. He is a reverse splits pitcher because of his very good changeup. Righties this year striking out 19.6% of the time. Lefties striking out 16%. Lefties have an expected ISO 110 points higher than right-handed hitters. That's not to say Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, these guys are bad, but you do actually, when you're looking at the Yankees here, you shouldn't shy away from the lefties either. So getting into the bats, starting on the Angels side, you do get negative correlation against Rodon, which is nice. You do have high upside bats in Yankee Stadium, which is always nice. Clearly not a great matchup. And like I said, only about a 135 expected ISO allowed to right-handed hitters for Rodon this year. The Angels do look like they're going a little bit under-owned here, especially when you factor in the negative correlation against a 30% owned Rodon. Zach Neto, 5,400 is expensive, but still an 11% chance of being optimal at shortstop. Mike Trout, 7% ownership along with Neto, 8% chance of being optimal, 4% ownership coming into a very cheap $3,200 Joe Adell. He gets a little bit of a lineup bump here, batting sixth. He has a 7% chance of being optimal. 5 to 6% on d'Arnaud at 2,700. Sean Newell at 3,500. Ward at 4K. So low probability stack in general, but it is a high upside offense. They do have plenty of power. They do have negative correlation. I think they are going a little bit under owned, even though they're not particularly likely to succeed. The Yankees are, of course, going to look a bit better in terms of probability. Aaron Judge, $6,600, 23% projected ownership, 13% chance of being optimal. Clearly, one of the best hitting plays on the slate if you can get to him. Do keep in mind, I mentioned it the other day, but in general this season, Ron Washington has been very willing to pitch around Judge, to intentionally walk him. And now you do have the lefty on the mound in Anderson as well. He is reverse splits, but still you have left-handed, you have Stanton right after Judge. So he does protect a little bit in terms of, are you going to walk Judge just to pitch to Stanton with the lefty? But there is some risk here of the Angels just not giving Judge anything to hit. We've seen that a lot this season. That being said, if they do give him anything to hit, he's likely to do damage. It is still Aaron Judge. So I think he's going a bit over-owned, but still one of the higher probability plays on the slate. Paul Goldschmidt, 17% ownership at 4,300, 12% chance of being optimal, 19% ownership coming into Stanton at only 3,900, 11% chance of being optimal, 8 to 10% chance of being optimal for Bellinger, for LeMahieu, for Chisholm, 6% to Wells, Volpe, Grisham. So I think the Yankees across the board are over-owned, but they are also one of the highest probability stacks. You can find ways to work around it. Maybe you mix the Angels in as a way to be contrarian, get some negative correlation while going to the Yankees. Maybe you use smaller versions of the Yankee stacks, 3-3-2s, stuff like that. There are still ways you can make this work. The Yankees do look good. Outside of Judge, they're cheap. Jazz Chisholm is 5,100. Nobody else other than him and Judge are above 5K. So they're affordable. They're a good value stack. They're a high upside stack. You just have to find ways to make the ownership work if you are going there. Rockies are taking on the Nats in DC. Trevor Williams pitching for the Nats. Chase Dollander is on the mound for Colorado. He's about as good as it gets from Colorado rotation. He is only 5,500. Trevor Williams only 5,700 here against the Rockies. That is a mispricing. Trevor Williams is actually not a terrible pitcher anyway. And then you get this matchup against Colorado. It is humid in the DC area. I'm an hour away in Baltimore. Went for a walk this morning, was sweating my ass off at like 9 in the morning. It's not comfortable out, and it is getting warmer. So ball should carry here in DC. You do have a pretty high total in this game, but 5,700 for Williams against the Rockies is too cheap from a projection standpoint. Total in this game is 9.5. So you are getting 22% ownership coming into him, 22% chance of being optimal. So far this season, Williams only striking out 17% of hitters in 69 innings pitched. Does have a 95 stuff plus grade, which is up from last year. 105 location plus grade. Command's a little bit better than last year. Not a terrible pitcher, just not a great pitcher, but he is only $5,700. So he does look like a good value option. You can pivot to Chase Dollander, though, if you need to save some ownership. Same price range at 5,500. Not as good a matchup, obviously, against the Nats. The Nats have plenty of good young hitters in this lineup. Better offense than the Rockies. But Dollander is only projected for about 5% ownership, 7% chance of being optimal. So basically, Williams looks like he's about 3 times as likely as Dollander to be in the optimal lineup, but he's projected for 4 to 5 times as much ownership. So if you do need to save some ownership, you can pivot to Dollander. But as you can see on the screen, Williams does have the better projection. He clearly has the better matchup here against the Rockies. So far this season as a rookie, Dollander striking out 20% of hitters. His stuff has graded out as above average so far, 104.5 stuff plus grade. His command has been shit, 86.5 location plus grade, so that's been a problem. But the raw stuff is there. He is capable of, when he's locating, racking up some strikeouts and being effective. Unlike most Colorado pitchers, he does at least have major league quality stuff. So don't mind him at low ownership in larger field tournaments, but Williams is obviously the more likely of the two to succeed because he is facing the Rockies. Colorado is getting some ownership here. Ryan McMahon pulling about 15%, Hunter Goodman pulling about 14%. They are both relatively inexpensive, and the matchup against Williams isn't terrible. Again, it's not like he's a horrible pitcher, but The hitting conditions here should be pretty good. 162 expected ISO allowed with only a 14% strikeout percentage this year to left-handed hitters. Righties, 21% strikeout percentage. 113 expected ISO, only a 261 expected WOBA. But Hunter Goodman is one of the better power hitting catchers in baseball. He is still only $4,100. 17% chance of being optimal, 14% ownership, 18% chance of being optimal for McMahon. Love that $3,400 price tag on him. Has the platoon advantage against Williams, which does matter. 15% ownership there. You're getting 9 to 10% on Mickey Moniak, on Jordan Beck, on Michael Toglia, on Sam Hilliard, on Orlando Arcia. Most of this Colorado lineup is in that like 9 to 10% range, and I think it's warranted. 9+% chance of being optimal for all of McMahon, Goodman, Moniak, Doyle, Beck, Toglia, Hilliard. 6% apiece for Arcia and Ritter. So you get some negative correlation against a cheap, popular Trevor Williams. You get value with Colorado. They look like a pretty good stack to get to, even though they're the Rockies. Washington on the other side here, about a 5.5 team total against Dollander. And as I mentioned before, plenty of young talent, high upside talent in this lineup. Luis Garcia getting 19% ownership, 17% coming into Wood, to Abrams, 14% to Brady House, 10% to Nathaniel Lowe, 9% to Bell, to Lyle, 8% to Ruiz, 8% to Young. So a lot of ownership coming in to the Nats here, but it does look warranted for the most part. 15+ or 14+% chance of being optimal for all of Garcia, Wood, Abrams, House, 9 to 10% 8 to 10% on Bell, Lowe, Young. So looks like just a good offense to get to, maybe a little overowned in a few spots, but again, a value offense for the most part. Wood and Abrams are expensive at 5,500 plus, but Luis Garcia 4,500 is fine. And then beyond that, only 3K for House, bagged fifth, 3,800 for Lowe, 3,300 for Bell. One negative is that Bell and Lowe are both first base only, so they're both hitting in the top 6. You can only get to one of them at a time on DraftKings. That does hurt a little bit, but overall, just really like this game for offense. It looks good, and also the pitching here is fine too. Dollander from a contrarian standpoint, Williams from a value standpoint. Jenna said, thanks for coming on for the early slate. Are you going to do another for the later slate? I'm doing the late slate on this show also. I'm going to just go through them both. I'm not going to be around this afternoon. So I'm going to just go through them both. And then for anybody watching it back later, timestamp will be in the description. Pittsburgh taking on Detroit here with one of the lowest team totals I have ever seen at about 2.5, going up against Tarek Skubal. So you get a terrible Pittsburgh offense facing off against arguably, I don't know if it's arguable, the best pitcher in baseball in Skubal. He is coming in at $12,000, but I don't really think that's going to be a problem here because you do have plenty of value. Already talked about the Rockies being cheap, the Nats being cheap. There are some relatively inexpensive bats on the Angels and on the Yankees. Obviously, we still have 3 other games to go as well. So I don't think it's going to be that difficult to get to Skubal. He's getting 69% projected ownership, 58% chance of being optimal. Far and away the highest projected pitcher on the slate at about 24 DraftKings points. He looks fantastic. You don't have a lot of opportunity cost at pitcher since there's only 12 pitchers total going. It's not, if this were a bigger slate, the $12,000 price tag on Skubal, if it were a bigger slate, you have more offenses going. You have more cheap pitching. You can make the case that it's easier to afford Skubal, but it's also more likely that mid-range guys put up similar scores to Skubal and he ends up not being optimal. When there's only 11 other pitchers, he just looks really, really good. Obviously, even at 12K, you're probably going to be able to make it up with bats. He is incredible. 32.7% strikeout percentage so far this year is up from last year. 118.4 stuff plus grade is up from an already very good 112 last season. 110 location plus grade is 10 points higher than 100 last year. 126.4 pitching plus grade, just unbelievably good. Fastball velo is up 0.8 miles an hour. He is incredible. It's very difficult to not want to get to Skubal here. 7% ownership coming into Heaney, 11% chance of being optimal at 8K. He's just a secondary option, just kind of a guy here. Not a great matchup against the Tigers. Very volatile pitcher, but his strikeout percentage this year is also down 4.5 points from last year. Stuff plus grade is down 6 points, so that's problematic as well. No confidence in Heaney, but it is only a 6-game slate. Offensively, you can obviously make the negative correlation argument for the Pirates, but that's about all that you can do. There is obviously nothing about Tarek Skubal that you can look to capitalize on that is a weakness that you can point to for Pittsburgh. Sub 100 expected ISO with a 33% K percentage against lefties, 143 expected ISO, sub 300 expected WOBA with a 33% K percentage against righties. Skubal is not one of these aces where it's like, yeah, but sometimes he gives up power to, right-handed hitters. He doesn't. He's incredible. The only case you can make is it's a 6-game slate. The Pirates aren't going to have any ownership, and Skubal's going to be rostered by 2/3 of the field. But 3% chance of being optimal for Nick Gonzalez, for Joey Bart, for Andrew McCutchen. Those are the highest marks for the Pirates. Obviously, an incredibly low chance of success for Pittsburgh. On the Tiger side, they do look better. Not a ton of ownership here. 9% to Torres, 9% to Jahmai Jones, batting second at 2,200. He does come with pinch hit risk, though, getting the start against the left-handed Andrew Heaney. If we scroll over here, you can see a 45% chance of being pinch hit for Jones. So he does have a high point per dollar projection, but keep in mind the ceiling is relatively low because he's probably just not going to get more than a couple of at-bats. But Gleyber Torres, 10% chance of being optimal, 8% for Spencer Torkelson at 7% owned, 4,400. Pretty solid price tags on both of those guys. Clearly, they both have plenty of power upside here against Heaney. Only a 153 expected ISO to righties this year. He's actually allowed a lot of power to lefties with a 291 expected ISO. But Gleyber Torres, 193 expected ISO against left-handed pitching since last season. Still like looking there. Torkelson, 274 since last season. And obviously, he's been great this year. You can, like I said, you can look to left-handed bats here if you're stacking. You have Riley Green in the lineup. No Kerry Carpenter. So again, Jahmai Jones is probably done. As soon as a right-handed pitcher comes in, you're going to have Carpenter hit for Jones. Riley Green is in there batting third, though. Certainly can mix him in the stacks. Wenzel Perez batting fifth. You have Parker Meadows batting ninth, only getting 3% ownership at 3,500. That's a way you can look to differentiate a little bit. So you have a 5 to 10% chance of being optimal for every hitter on the Tigers. The highest chance of being optimal, Gleyber Torres at 10% at 4,700. So the Tigers look like a pretty solid secondary stack, a team you can use at modest ownership, mix them in with more popular bats if you need to. St. Louis facing off against the White Sox in Chicago. Sean Burke getting the start after his start was rained out the other day, going up against Eric Fedde. 14% projected ownership coming in to Fedde. He has the favorable matchup against the White Sox. He is only 7K. You can see not a great projection here, but 6-game slate and not a ton of good pitching outside of Skubal. So 13 to 14% ownership coming into Fedde, 9% chance of being optimal. $6,800 price tag here on Burke, 4% owned. Right now, we actually have him with a 10% chance of being optimal. Our projection on him is relatively high at 6,800. It's not a good matchup against the Cards. They don't strike out a lot. They are an above average offense. So I'm a little surprised that he is projecting as well as he is. Not that he's projecting great or anything like that. Only striking out 16% of hitters so far this year, 91.5 stuff plus grade. So I don't really like him, but he's not getting ownership and hitting is hard, I guess is kind of the argument here if you do want to go to Burke. For the offenses, the Cards are popular, 10 to 15% ownership to most bats on the Cardinals, and it does look pretty warranted here. So even though we are a little high on Burke, we do also still like the Cards reasonably well. 10 to 15% chance of being optimal for Wynn, for Donovan, for Contreras, Herrera, Burleson, Nootbaar, Arenado. Not sure if we've gotten a Cardinals lineup. We didn't have it when I ran everything. I am refreshing now to see. We did get it. So it's Wynn, Herrera, Burleson, Contreras. Gorman batting fifth. He was not in the projected lineup that I had. So 3,100, he's going to look like a good value at second base. Arenado batting sixth, Nootbaar 7, Walker, and Scott. So there is no Brendan Donovan. That is Gorman instead. So Gorman's going to look like a good value here. But other than that, the Cardinals just look pretty good against Burke. Again, hasn't been great this year. He was the White Sox opening day starter, but that is because the White Sox have 0 pitchers that are worthy of being opening day starters. 288 expected ISO allowed to righties this year, 174 to lefties. So he is giving up some power to lefties, but righties have really done damage. Strikeout percentage is 5 points lower against righties as well. So again, Burleson looks fine, Gorman looks fine, but don't sleep on Herrera and Contreras, 2 right-handed power bats in this lineup you can look to as well. Jordan Walker, probably going to be relatively owned batting eighth. That's a way you can be different within card stacks. Also, On the White Sox side, Fetty is getting some ownership, so you do get some negative correlation against him. He's certainly not a great pitcher. He's getting ownership because of the lack of options on the slate and because the White Sox suck. But so far this season, right-handed hitters, 157 expected ISO. Lefties have done some expected damage, though. 193 expected ISO is about 70 points higher than the 126 actual ISO allowed. For the White Sox, you have Tauchman leading off from the left side. You have Benintendi hitting third. You have Kyle Teal batting fifth. The White Sox are cheap, too, and they're getting less ownership than a team like the Rockies. So they are a way that while they suck and you're not going to feel great about going there, they are a way you can be a little bit different when people are going to Rockies bats, which also suck. Chase Maydroff, 13% chance of being optimal at 8% owned, 13% chance of being optimal for Benintendi at 9%, 11% chance of being optimal for Vargas at 10%, 7 to 8% for Robert, for Teal, for Tauchman at 6 to 8% ownership. So there is some ownership here, but in general, they are a little bit lower owned than a team like Colorado. And I think that they should be. Colorado does have the higher total. I do think that the spot is a little bit better for Colorado. And the top of the order, McMahon in particular, Goodman, are actually good hitters. But I do think if you need to save a little bit of ownership, you can use the White Sox as a value stack as well. Milwaukee facing the Cubs in Wrigley, relatively low total in this one. So I am assuming that wins are probably blowing in. Looks like it's a bit up in the air, but the total in this game is only 8.5. Usually that is an indicator that at the very least the wind is not blowing out. Jameson Taillon is pitching for the Cubs. Jacob Mizorowski is going for Milwaukee, I believe. Looks like that might be in question. Sorry, Freddie Peralta going for Milwaukee. I don't know why I had Mizorowski listed. Do the Cubs maybe have a doubleheader today? I don't know, whatever. Freddie Peralta, so I didn't have Peralta in when I ran my stuff. I don't know why that is. But Jameson Taillon, 13% ownership, 18% chance of being optimal. So we have Peralta listed now, 8,700, 15 fantasy point projection. He will probably be relatively popular. Tough matchup against the Cubs will keep the ownership in check at least a little bit. But obviously a good strikeout pitcher there, somebody you can certainly get to on the 6-game slate. Taillon getting about 13% ownership, 18% chance of being optimal when I ran my stuff. That was without Peralta, so it probably comes down a little bit. 15% projected ownership coming into Peralta. Both pitchers here kind of look like secondary options. Taillon has been solid this year, but he does have a tough strikeout matchup against the Brewers. 20% strikeout percentage overall this season. So not in love with either pitcher because of the respective matchups. Peralta this season striking out 24.5% of hitters. That is down about 3 points from last year, and the matchup with the Cubs is tough against right-handed pitching. So far this season, the Cubs active roster is 20th in strikeout percentage. They are 9th in WRC+, so not an ideal matchup, but both guys are decent. I assume Aggressive Goose is saying that Mizorowski was scratched because he's sick. Not sure. Anyway, yeah, it looks like it's Peralta. Casey facing Texas, in Texas, wrapping this slate up. Michael Wacha is going for Kansas City. For Texas, looks like we have Sean Armstrong opening, and then likely being followed by Jacob Latz. Latz is 5K. Armstrong is 5K. No interest in either of those guys. Wacha is getting about 15% ownership, about a 15% chance of being optimal. The Rangers are not particularly good. They have talent. They haven't really put it together so far this season. You are going to have most likely a right-handed heavy lineup here for Texas. That is noteworthy with Wacha because he is somebody that for a lot of his career has been reverse splits because he is changeup reliant. And so far this season, he has allowed a 192 expected ISO to righties compared to 150 to lefties. So it might be a sneaky spot to kind of get to some of these right-handed Texas bats in a park that does give up a lot more power than Wacha's home park. Maybe looking to Wyatt Langford, to Marcus Semien, to Berger, to Young could be kind of an interesting way to go. But also at 7,500, I do think Wacha is a perfectly fine play here. He's just in that bucket with a lot of other guys in that price range, Andrew Heaney type guys, where he's not great, but you don't really have a lot of great mid-range options on this slate. You kind of just have Skubal at the top Peralta in a tough spot from a talent standpoint. Carlos Rodon at the top, but not a lot in the mid-range that you're going to feel great about. So I think he's fine. Offensively here for Kansas City, 12% ownership coming into Bobby Witt. Showing up as optimal 16% of the time here at 5,300. That's just still a pretty cheap price tag for somebody that has the power upside that Witt has, that has the stolen base upside. You're getting a park upgrade in terms of home runs, so that looks good. So I do think Witt is going a little bit under-owned here. 8% ownership coming into Garcia, 10% to India, 9% to Perez. I think Kansas City in general just a little bit under-owned again because I've talked about it before, but Kauffman Stadium, a very good park for scoring runs, not a great park for hitting home runs. Getting them in Texas is a better park for scoring fantasy points. And you do have power here that is just cheap because they play their home games in a stadium where you don't hit a lot of home runs. So 5,300 is cheap for Witt's skill set. 3,200 catcher and first base eligibility for Salvador Perez. Michael Garcia, third base only, but 4,300 batting third. Jonathan India is still cheap at 3,200. Pasquantino batting cleanup at 3,700. You have outfield eligibility on Caglione, so you do have the ability to play him and Pasquantino together. I do think that across the board, really, Kansas City is just going a little bit under-owned here. I like them in tournaments against Texas, even though the bullpen game isn't the most appealing thing in the world. For Texas, I mentioned it, but the right-handed bats, not to say Corey Seager is not a good play, because Corey Seager is always a good play, but the right-handed bats here going maybe a little bit under-owned. Wyatt Langford in particular, 8% chance of being optimal at 6% ownership, 7% for $3,500 Semien at 6% ownership. Jake Berger getting 3% ownership, 6% chance of being optimal, 5% for Young at 4% owned. So not a super high probability team, but it is a good home run park against a pitcher that gives up power to right-handed hitters. The Rangers do, at least in theory, have right-handed power, even though it hasn't always been there this year. So again, you can play Josh Smith, you can play Seager, you can play Carter. Those guys have upside as well. But I wanted to highlight the right-handed bats against Waka just because of the fact that he has generally reverse splits. He does have a good changeup that helps to neutralize left-handed bats a little bit, but doesn't play as well necessarily against righties. So I do like the right-handed bats here a bit for Texas. So to quickly recap the early slate, at the top, for pitching, we have, that's not what I wanted. Need to uncheck this. At the top, for pitching, Skubal, Rodon, Peralta, the highest projected guys. Trevor Williams is your best value. Offensively, at catcher, starting at catcher, you can see the projections on the screen. And in terms of optimal rate, Hunter Goodman, William Contreras, Ivan Herrera, Salvador Perez, your top catching options. At first base, Wilson Contreras, Paul Goldschmidt, Michael Toglia, Spencer Torkelson. At second base, Luis Garcia. Brendan Donovan is out. You're going to get probably good point per dollar projection on Nolan Gorman, Jonathan India, Lieber Torres. At third base, looking like Ryan McMahon, Michael Garcia, Miguel Vargas for some value. You can also look to Nolan Arenado or Brady House. At shortstop, Bobby Witt Jr., C.J. Abrams, Mason Wynn at the top. And then in the outfield, James Wood, Aaron Judge, just like the projections. Andrew Benintendi for some value. Look to Mickey Moniak. Brent Doyle for some value. Giancarlo Stanton is cheap at only $3,900 against the lefty, even though Anderson's not terrible against righties. From a stacking standpoint overall, Colorado, Washington, St. Louis, Yankees, White Sox showing up as the top five. The top five-man stacks, St. Louis, Colorado, Milwaukee, Washington, Kansas City. So a mix of paying up and getting to value stacks there. Now going to move over to the main slate. Don't know how long this show has been going on. So there it is, 29 minutes. So make a note for that for myself. Moving over now to the main slate. 5-gamer tonight on DraftKings. We do not have game 2 of the Pirates and Tigers doubleheader, thank God, because that is always a pain in the ass. So only a 5-gamer here. We do, one thing I'll say off the top, and I'll get to it as well when we get to that game. I do think our projections on the Houston and Athletics game are going to be higher for hitters and lower for pitchers by the time we get there. When we ran stuff this morning, we're just lower than market on runs in this game. Only had 8.5 projected. So just keep that in mind that optimal rates here are going to be skewed a little bit. I already know that our optimal rate on pitching in this game is much higher than ownership, and on hitters it's lower. So just kind of keep that up. That it is, keep that in mind. That it does have a trickle down effect throughout the slate. Obviously, the better the pitching in that game looks, then pitching elsewhere looks worse relatively and vice versa. But I do think those projections will be higher by game time, but I just wanted to point that out. Starting with Philadelphia taking on Miami. In Miami, for the Marlins, we have Edward Cabrera. For the Phillies, we have Christopher Sanchez. Sanchez coming in at 9K, about a 15 fantasy point projection. Cabrera coming in at 7K, projected for 12 to 13 fantasy points. 22% ownership coming into Cabrera, 37% coming into Sanchez, 18% chance of being optimal, 17 to 18% for both of these guys. So right now, it does look like Sanchez is going a little bit over-owned. But again, I do expect optimal rates to go up for really any good pitchers that are not in the Sacramento game, because I know that Colton Gordon and Jacob Lopez right now have higher optimal rates than they will later. So do keep that in mind for any pitchers that I say, look under-owned. But they both, either way, look decent. 7K is a reasonable price tag for Cabrera. Very, very good stuff. It's just a matter of can he locate. That tends to come and go for him. He has shown an improvement so far this season, though, in both Stuff Plus and Location Plus. Location Plus at 100.3. That's up 5 points from last year. Stuff Plus is up to 104.5. That's up 6 points from last year, striking out 25% of hitters. The matchup here does suck, and that's why you're not going to feel super great about going to him, but he is getting 22% ownership based on the talent. Also, this game being in Miami is a park downgrade for Philadelphia. No Bryce Harper is obviously a benefit for pitchers facing the Phillies right now as well. And it's only a 5-game slate. So again, just getting arm talent at 7K on a 5-game slate is going to have some appeal, even in a scary matchup. For Sanchez on the other side, does have a solid matchup here against Miami. He has struck out 26% of hitters this year. That is up 6 points from last year. Stuff Plus grade is up 6.5 points. Command is down 9 points, so that has hurt him this year. But overall, you have seen the uptick in strikeouts. He is a very good pitcher. He does get the park upgrade here as well. So I like Sanchez. I think the matchup's good. I think the ownership at 37% is probably a little high. But again, that you're talking about one player in your lineup. Individual player ownership really does not matter that much. You can make plus EV lineups with any individual player, basically, especially the good ones. Like, obviously, that might not be true if you pick like the worst player on the slate. But somebody like Christopher Sanchez, I guarantee you can find plus EV lineups, even though he's going a little bit over-owned. Offensively here, you do get some negative correlation with quality Phillies bats going against Cabrera. And I do think they're going a little underrepresented right now. You have, and again, keep in mind, offenses in general are going to skew a little bit high in terms of optimal rates right now because the Houston and Athletics game doesn't look as good as it should. But Alec Boehm getting 12% ownership, Real Muto at 12%, 11% to Turner, 9 to 10% for all of Schwarber, Castellanos, Kepler, Marsh, Stott coming in at 7%. So you're basically 7 to 12% ownership on everybody on Philadelphia. And for the most part, their optimal rates are a little bit higher. Everybody in the like 10 to 18% range. You do have value here. Turner's expensive. Schwarber's expensive. Everybody else is 4,100 or less. If Otto Kemp's in the lineup, he's 3K. Brandon Marsh is 2,800. 3,800 for Boehm, probably hitting the middle of the order is nice. Real Muto, 3,500 is nice. So again, it is a park downgrade here compared to Citizens Bank. 187 expected ISO allowed with only a 19.5% strikeout percentage against righties this year. By comparison, Cabrera has struck out 30% of lefties. Changeup is really good. Throws it 31% of the time against lefties. Doesn't get a ton of swings and misses on it, but I think it does help lead to a 19% swinging strike percentage on his fastball. He has a 19% swinging strike percentage on his curveball against lefties, so gets a lot of swinging strikes there. Doesn't get as many strikeouts against righties. 11% swinging strike percentage against righties, 11.7 against lefties, but again, the higher K percentage against left-handed hitters. So Boehm, Real Muto, Turner, Castellanos do look a little bit better, considering Cabrera has had reverse splits so far this season in terms of power numbers and strikeout percentage against righties. For Miami, 7% chance of being optimal for Agustin Ramirez percent ownership for Agustin Ramirez is the high mark on the slate. About a 9 to 10% chance of being optimal for him. About an 8% chance of being optimal for Xavier Edwards at 5% owned. And then 5% or less ownership coming into the rest of Miami. Basically 5 to 8% chance of being optimal everywhere. So I think they're going a little bit under-owned as well. You do get some negative correlation against Sanchez, but still a low probability spot here. Sanchez is a good pitcher. He's getting the park upgrade. righties this year, only a 147 expected ISO with a 26% strikeout percentage. He's been virtually unhittable against lefties, 0.031 expected ISO, 27.5% strikeout percentage. So it's not that Miami looks good at all. It's that on a 5-game slate, they should probably be like 5 to 10% owned instead of 0 to 5% owned, but still a very low probability spot. The priorities are not actual priorities, but the best plays from Miami, I think, are just going to a $3,800 catcher with power in Ramirez, going to a 4K second baseman with stolen base upside in Edwards. Mets are taking on the Braves in Atlanta. Spencer Strider going for the Braves. Clay Holmes is on the mound for the Mets. Strider has been up and down so far as he's worked his way back from injury. He is coming off of a very good start. His last time out, that was against, if I remember correctly, the Rockies, so it doesn't entirely count. But it is good to see, him handle business, do what he should after some rougher starts earlier in the season. Does have a difficult matchup here against the Mets. I think this is a really volatile spot, really big boom or bust spot considering what we've seen so far this season. 13 strikeouts in 6 innings against Colorado last start. But you go back previously against San Francisco, had 5 strikeouts in 6 innings, only 4 strikeouts in 5 innings against Arizona with 3 home runs allowed a couple of starts ago. He's given up 5 home runs in total this year through 6 starts. And this Mets offense, he will have his work cut out for him. They are a good offense, but he is 10,600. He's getting 27% ownership. I think that's a little bit high, 17% chance of being optimal. So again, I think he's a good play here, but the ownership probably a little bit higher than it should be, given that it is a tough strikeout matchup against the Mets. You do have a relatively high total here as well, around 4.5, 120 WRC plus against right-handed pitching for New York is 6th highest in baseball this year. Their strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching ranks 23rd. It is not an easy matchup here for Strider. Clay Holmes on the other side, 11% ownership, 17% chance of being optimal at 7,500. Probably does come down a little bit once we adjust projections in that A's game, but I don't mind Holmes as a secondary option at 7,500. Transitioning, 2 starters so far this season. You have seen the strikeout percentage come down to only 21%, but the stuff has played 102 stuff plus grade still. Command has been a bit above average as well. Not an easy matchup against the Braves, clearly, and that's why you're not going to see a ton of ownership coming in there. The Braves' active roster this season ranks 14th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They rank 14th in WRC plus. You have Acuna back, which obviously makes this lineup a lot better. But it's a 5-game slate. Holmes is not a bad pitcher. I don't mind mixing him in a little bit as a mid-range play. Offensively, starting on the Mets side, 10% ownership coming into Soto. That is the high mark here. 8% to Lindor, 7% to Nimmo, 6% apiece to Alonso, McNeil, about 5% to Alvarez. Optimal rates are a bit higher. I do think the Mets are going under-owned, and that's not really surprising given that I think Strider is going over-owned, and that I think this is just a really volatile spot. Like I said, so far this season through his first 6 starts, Strider has allowed a 219 expected ISO to lefties, 201 to righties. He has not done a good job of limiting quality contact when hitters put the ball in play, and that's a scary thing when you're facing Juan Soto, Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor. The margin for error for Strider is very, very small, and he has not been very consistent so far this season. His slider hasn't played as well as in the past. His location plus grade this year is 90.8. That is well below average. And again, going against this Mets team where if you're not locating well, they are going to do damage, especially if, through a small sample, your stuff isn't playing as well as it has been in the past either. Could his last start have just been start 1 in him getting back to being dominant? Absolutely. But am I convinced that dominating the Rockies is proof that he's back? Absolutely not. So again, just a really volatile spot here. Certainly don't mind having some Strider given the upside, but I really don't mind getting to the Mets on a 5-game slate where they're all getting 10% ownership or less. Either Soto, Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor, McNeil. I think this whole team is going under-owned, but the biggest priorities obviously are the ones you would expect: Soto, Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor. On the Atlanta side, against Holmes, 13% ownership coming into Acuna, sub 10% everywhere else, about 8% to Riley, to Albies, to Olsen, to Ozuna, to Harris, 6% to Baldwin, who's probably hitting near the top of the order against Holmes. So far this season, Clay Holmes has allowed a 162 expected ISO to righties, 179 to lefties, so decent but not great. Expected power numbers against both sides of the plate, 22.5% K percentage to righties, 19.5% to lefties. Traditional splits a little bit, but nothing too crazy. You can just go to the best hitters on Atlanta. I think the ownership is probably a little low in most spots. Riley, 12% chance of being optimal, leads the way at 4,800. 10% for Baldwin, 10% for Acuna, 9% for Albies, Olsen, Harris, 7% for Ozuna. So basically 7 to 12% for most of the relevant bats on Atlanta at 5 to 10% ownership. So I think both of these offenses are interesting here. I think the Mets are going a little bit more under-owned than the Braves are, given just the respect that people are going to give to Strider. Baltimore taking on Tampa Bay as they look to bounce back from the worst loss any team has had this season in Major League Baseball, blowing an 8-0 lead yesterday against Tampa Bay. Hopefully does not have a carryover effect here for Baltimore. Charlie Morton, $6,500 price tag. Drew Rasmussen, $7,800. Morton looks good here. $6,500 price tag is still really cheap. He has mostly been good for a while now. Obviously, a horrible start to the season. They moved him to the bullpen, gave him a few, relief appearances there. He started to look better, started to command his stuff better. Has been mostly solid since moving back into the rotation as well. Overall, now as a starting pitcher this season, 44 2/3 innings pitched, 23% strikeout percentage is obviously not bad for that price tag. It is a risky spot in that Tampa Bay is a good offense. They have good hitters. They're in this bullshit minor league stadium in Tampa, but $6,500 price tag on a 5-game slate, that looks good. One other thing to consider here that I think is a benefit for Morton, at least in terms of his projection and his upside, it can also have, I guess it lowers his downside too. The Orioles had to use a bunch of relievers yesterday. The Orioles are in the middle of a stretch of like 16 straight games or something like that. They are probably going to have a long leash on Charlie Morton here. So he's probably not going to get yanked because he puts 3 guys on base in the 3rd inning or something like that. So that does make him look a little bit better. They would probably absolutely love if he can go 6+ innings here. So at 6,500, I think he looks good. 27% ownership. Right now, a 39% chance of being optimal. Again, that will come down once Jacob Lopez's projection in the Athletics game decreases as another value play. Or actually, no, I guess it would go up. So yeah, Morton's just going to look, I think, really good here. Again, don't confuse that with him being safe, but he projects very well for a $6,500 salary. The Rays are a good strikeout matchup, and he's just been a pretty solid pitcher overall since hopefully figuring things out after the rough start to the season. Only a 141 expected ISO allowed to righties this year, 186 to lefties, 24.5% K percentage to lefties, 22% to righties. I've been rambling off these numbers throughout the first 2 games of the slate, and Morton's numbers aren't really much worse than anybody else's that we've talked about outside of, I guess, Strider, and he's only 6,500. On the other side, 25% ownership to Rasmussen at 7,800, 22% chance of being optimal. He looks good here as well. The Orioles lineup, remains to be seen who is in it. Rutschman did get the day off yesterday, so I assume he's playing. One thing to keep in mind here, if Kobe Mayo is in the lineup, strikeout percentage for Rasmussen is going to tick up a little bit, but overall, he's just going to look pretty good. It is a dangerous spot. The Orioles have good hitters really top to bottom now in their lineup. It is a deeper lineup as they get healthier, but there are still strikeouts to be had here. Rasmussen is a good pitcher overall. So far this season, has only allowed a 163 expected ISO to lefties, 122 to righties, but he has a 25% strikeout percentage against lefties compared to 18% against righties. So kind of just some added volatility there where most of the best hitters on the Orioles are left-handed. It is going to be a left-handed heavy lineup. Rasmussen does give up more power to lefties, but he also strikes them out at a higher rate. So I do like Rasmussen as a mid-range option here. Offensively, you can get some negative correlation by going to either one of these offenses. The Orioles are getting basically 5% ownership to most guys, 10% to Henderson at 4,600, but 5% to Jackson Holliday, 7% to Westberg, 7% to Rutschman, 5% give or take to Mullins, to O'Hearn, to Laureano, to Cowser. So again, just a pretty low-owned offense here. Optimal rates in the 5 to 10% range. So going a little bit under-owned. Not a good matchup against Rasmussen, but ownership should probably be a little bit higher, and you do get that negative correlation against 25% ownership as well. On the Tampa Bay side, I think right now at least they're going a little bit over-owned, which is not surprising given that Morton projects as well as he does for us. Maybe that projection comes down a little bit. It does, to my eye, seem a little bit high, but again, he really hasn't been bad for the most part after that horrible start. So you're getting basically 10% ownership to Caminero, to Diaz, to Lau, a little bit higher to Lowe, 8% to Aranda, 5% to Mangum, to Walls. Optimal rates are lower, 5% to Caminero, 5% to Diaz, 4 to 5% to Lau and Lowe. So I think the Rays going a little bit over-owned right now. Wouldn't mind turning some of that into the Orioles, into maybe the Mets. But it is a high upside spot. The ceiling for the Rays is probably a little bit higher here too, for the same reason that I said Morton's is higher. If Morton doesn't have it today, the Orioles are probably just going to leave him out there and tell him to eat it. Kind of like I can't remember who it was the other day. Completely blanking. I thought I had it, but there was a pitcher the other day that I had a lot of stacks against, and it was nice because whoever it was, their bullpen was depleted, and he didn't have it. He's getting lit up, and at one point, it was Chris Paddock for Minnesota. At one point, the pitching coach went out. He was at around like 80 pitches. He'd given up like 8 runs or something, and the pitching coach went out, and you can kind of tell just even by Paddock's expression that all the pitching coach had to say was, "You're going to stay out here and eat it because we're not going to burn the bullpen here." So you're getting to 100 pitches basically. So while that does give Morton a higher ceiling, because there's a good chance that's what the Orioles are going to do with him today, it does also give the Rays a higher ceiling where I think Morton is a solid pitcher. I don't love the spot on average for the Rays, but if Morton does not have it today, he is going to just stand out there and give up runs because I don't think the Orioles are going to pull him early. So the ceiling is high for Tampa Bay. I do want to point that out. Houston taking on the A's. So 20th reminder of the show. I do view this game a bit differently than it's being projected right now early in the morning. We have Jacob Lopez going for the A's. We have Colton Gordon going for the Astros. 13% projected ownership coming into Gordon, 6% to Lopez. Both sub 7K, 6,700 price tag on Gordon, 6,300 on Lopez. I think they're both fine secondary options. Gordon will look like the better of the two, but he's not going to have a 16 fantasy point projection, I don't think. I think that will come down. Similarly, the 12 fantasy point projection on Lopez will come down. So I think they're both going to end up being secondary, cheap SP2 type plays, but I don't think either one is going to be the priority that they kind of both look like right now with the way we have it projected. Similarly, the offenses here in our projections already look good, but I think they will end up looking better by the time we get to lock. 15 to 25% ownership pretty much across the board. 26% to Altuve, 27 to Diaz, 24 to Pena, 20 to Christian Walker, 16% to Paredes, 13% to Dubon, 12% to Smith, to Myers. So very, very popular Houston team. And optimal rates right now are in like 10 to 15% range. 18% for Altuve is the high mark. I do think those go up a little bit once we adjust projections there and get more in line with the market. This is just going to be one of those teams where they look really good because they're so cheap and because the matchup against Lopez is fine, the ballpark's good for hitting home runs, etc. It's just one of those teams that's really difficult to get completely away from because not only are they likely to score the most runs on the slate, but they're pretty much the top point per dollar plays across the board. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to be different within your lineups. Maybe, they're a good team to mix in the Mets. You can mix in the Orioles. You can mix in the Marlins. Maybe going to lower owned pitching, like maybe you mix in some Clay Holmes there at 11% ownership. There are ways you can do it, and I've talked about it before too. The 3-by-2 stacks, 3-3-2, those are a little bit easier to get to on 5-game slates as well. So there are ways that you can differentiate with the Astros, but do keep in mind they are going to be very popular. They do look very good here against Lopez. So far this season, Lopez has only allowed a 159 expected ISO to righties with a 28% strikeout percentage. That is in a limited sample, but he has been solid so far. So, there is that. If you wanted to play some Lopez, you do get negative correlation against the really popular Astros. So that does make sense as well at only 6,300 in tournaments. For the A's, 20% ownership coming into Rooker, 14% to Urias, 13% to Butler, 11% to Muncy, 10% to Wilson. And kind of similar to the Astros, you are getting less ownership here. I do think they're going a little bit under-owned, but not by as much as Houston is. Or sorry, a little bit over-owned, but not by as much as Houston is right now. So far this season, again, limited sample for Gordon. 191 expected ISO allowed against righties, 20% strikeout percentage. He projects as a decent pitcher, but nothing special. So I do like Rooker. I do think the A's are a high upside offense in general in this part. The problem is just that the offense, the lineup isn't going to be that good. You don't have Shea Langoliers, which weakens it quite a bit. Soderstrom and Butler hit from the left side, which isn't ideal against Gordon. So it does weaken it a little bit, but Rooker is going to look really good. Jacob Wilson, I don't love paying 5K for because he does lack home run upside, but it is only a 5-game slate, so that'll make him look a little bit better. Muncy is only 2,900, so that is a good value there. And then if you are stacking them, going to Butler and Soderstrom, if they're in the lineup, is perfectly fine as well. And then wrapping this up with San Diego and the Dodgers, about a 5.5 total for the Dodgers, sub 4 for the Padres. Yamamoto is pitching for the Dodgers. Bergert is going for the Padres. 2% ownership coming into 6K. Ryan Bergert, 4.5% chance of being optimal. Not somebody that looks particularly appealing here, outside of just, I guess, throwing him in large field tournament lineups and praying. Yamamoto on the other side, 26% ownership, 14% chance of being optimal. We do generally just not come in quite as high on Yamamoto as a lot of the industry does. It is a tough strikeout matchup against the Padres. No Jackson Merrill does make it a little bit better, but tough strikeout spot, good pitcher. He is relatively expensive, though, at 10,300 as well. So we do have a little bit lower optimal rate on him than Strider, but they are similar. So do keep an eye on ownership projections there. Right now, you have similar ownership projections to Strider and to Yamamoto. We have similar chances of being optimal to both of them. If ownership does end up skewing one way or the other, if you're watching shows later in the day and people just love Strider for whatever reason, maybe they're really caught up and impressed because he struck out 13 Rockies, then Yamamoto would start to look better, or vice versa. I think you should end up with similar ownership to Strider and to Yamamoto. I think they're very comparable. Offensively here, the Padres, even though Yamamoto doesn't project maybe quite as well for us as for the industry in general, the Padres still are in a tough spot, but I do think they're going a little bit under-owned given how cheap they are. $4,900 price tag for Tatis, only 10% ownership, but then only 5% to Machado, to Bogarts, 4% to Cronenworth, to Sheets, 3% to O'Reilly. This is a good park for offense, and it is a talented offense. So on a 5-game slate, I am a little surprised that you're not getting more ownership coming into the Padres. Then you also get negative correlation as well. 160 expected ISO allowed to righties for Yamamoto this year. No power at all allowed to lefties, but you do have Tatis, Machado as power bats from the right side. Bogarts as a guy that had power at some point in his life, doesn't really anymore. I think the Padres are a pretty good low-owned, cheap stack. Like, you're going to make really good lineups around the Padres, which is, I think, what's driving up their optimal rates a little bit. It's not that you expect them to have success often against Yamamoto because he is very good, but you get that same lineup build for the most part that you do with the Astros. And like I was saying with the Astros, like, the reason they're so popular, it's not just that they're likely to have a good game in Sacramento. It's that when they have a good game, you have whatever pitching you want around them because they're so cheap. You have whatever bats you want around them. You do get that same thing here with the Padres. Tatis and Machado right around 5K are fine. But other than that, the most expensive hitter in the lineup is probably O'Reilly at 3,600. So while the Padres are not going to do well very often, when they do well, you have whatever else you want, and they're low owned. So I think that's why they are grading out relatively well. It's not that they are going to succeed very often. It's that when they do, you get paid off pretty nicely because the rest of your lineup looks very good. Dodgers, rather, on the other side, they are getting ownership, specifically Ohtani getting 32%, as you would expect. He looks very good, 29% chance of being optimal for him at 6,500. First base, outfield eligible, very easy to get into lineups. Love getting to Ohtani, that goes without saying. Very small sample so far in the majors for Ryan Bergert, but love Ohtani. And then you're getting like 10 to 15% ownership to Smith, Muncy, Edman, Betts, Hernandez, Freeman, Pajes, Conforto, basically the rest of the lineup. And for the most part, I think they're going a little bit under-owned. 19% chance of being optimal for Smith, 19% for the good Max Muncy, 17 apiece on Edman, on Betts, 15 on Hernandez, 14 on Freeman and Pajes. One nice thing about this slate is that because the pitching absolutely blows, you can actually find the salary for Dodgers bats. Most slates, like if you were to throw the Dodgers on the early slate, their optimal rates would be really low because 12K Skubal, 10-7 Rodon, etc. are such big priorities on that early slate. Here on the night slate, Strider and Yamamoto are good, but they're not the same level of priority, I don't think, as the guys on the early slate. And then you just have, you have a cheap Morton, you have a cheap Lopez, you have a reasonably priced Rasmussen, you have a cheap Holmes, you have a cheap Cabrera. Even Sanchez isn't that expensive. You can, spend 15K, 16K at pitching, feel relatively good about it, and then actually be able to get to the good Dodgers bats, which is unusual. So this is the first slate in a while where I've actually thought, like, I thought the Dodgers were going under-owned, but it's been more of like they're getting 4% ownership and it should be 6. This is the first slate that I can remember in a while where even outside of Ohtani, you're seeing 15 to 20% optimal rates on Dodgers hitters, throughout the lineup. So I do like the Dodgers here. I do think they are a way that you can kind of counteract the Astros. You're going to get a different lineup build because they are expensive, but I don't think the opportunity cost of doing that is as high on this slate because there's a pretty good chance that you can just make it up, that the cheap pitchers are going to score in the same ballpark, at least, as the expensive pitchers. So to recap here, and again, keep in mind as I go through these optimal rates that I do think pitching on Houston comes down and hitting in the Houston game goes up. But going through optimal rates now, starting with the pitching at the top, Charlie Morton for value. Again, Colton Gordon's really high right now, but I think that'll come down. I do think he's still going to project as a good value play, though, at 6,700. I don't think he's going to end up being like bad or anything. Drew Rasmussen, Edward Cabrera. So again, really right now, at least just preferring these cheap and mid-range arms and getting to some good bats. From a projection standpoint, you can see Yamamoto and Strider at the top. At catcher, and I do want to reiterate, like they're the two highest projected pitchers on the slate. It's just a scary matchup, tough matchup for both of them, and they are expensive. At catcher, Will Smith, JT Realmuto, Yainer Diaz at the top. At first base, Pete Alonso in the tough matchup against Strider, Freddie Freeman, Christian Walker, Shohei Ohtani, first base, outfield. Second base, top fantasy points. Second base, Tommy Edman, Bryson Stott, Jake Cronenworth, Jackson Holliday at the top. Altuve is split between the two positions, so that's why he's not up there, but Altuve looks great as well. Third base, the good Max Muncy on the Dodgers, Isaac Paredes, Manny Machado. You can see the projections there. Shortstop, Mookie Betts, Trey Turner, Jeremy Pena at the top, also like Francisco Lindor. And then in the outfield, Shohei Ohtani, Fernando Tatis, Juan Soto, Kyle Schwarber, Brandon Nimmo, Teoscar Hernandez, a bunch of really good hitters in the outfield. Looking at stacks overall, Dodgers, Phillies, Astros at the top. And again, Astros probably move up a little bit. Do like the Mets, mixing them in against Strider as well. They're coming in fourth now. Dodgers, Phillies, Astros as the top 5 mans as well. Home run pick, forgot to do it for the early slate, so I will go back. But home run pick, gonna go with Teoscar here against Berger. I like that one, and I don't think it's cheating because the guys ahead of him are, Ohtani and Soto. But Hernandez not on that level, so I don't think that's cheating. I will flip back and grab a home run pick from the early slate now as well. Yeah, I don't know. Stanton against Anderson, but I like Langford here. I like that spot against Waka in Texas. So I'm going Wyatt Langford on the early slate. So that's all I have for you on this one. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for checking it out. Good luck on your lineups today and tonight, and I'll see you back here again tomorrow.